So we're going to do a mimer of the Rebbe for the next 3 weeks. It's a long mimer and a deep mimer. It's going to get deeper each week, so you gotta stay with it. It's a mimer that the Rebbe said in 1978 on an aspect of the Haggadah. Okay.
Lisa Weinbach.
All right, so let me just grab a chumash 1 second. All right, so a bit of an introduction. So we know that on the Haggadah there are 4 sons. The first one is the Chacham, the wise son. Now, why do we have 4 sons? Where does it come from? They're based on 4 psukim in the Chumash, right? In other words, the obligation of relating to our children on Pesach night, which is the basis of the Haggadah. Right, we know that. There's a mitzvah to tell a story of going on a Mitzrayim on Pesach night. The way we do it is by telling the next generation. That's the way it's structured. That doesn't mean if someone is sitting at a study table without children, he's not obligated. He is obligated. But that's just the way it's done, the way, right? So, okay. The whole Banishtana comes from that because some of the psukim. Now, there's 4 psukim in the Torah where it talks about this. Right, from which we derive the 4 sons. That's how it works. Yeah, it comes from. What's interesting is that in the Haggadah, doesn't quite replicate exactly what it says in the Torah, especially in the one of the Chacham. That's a whole other discussion why that is. But what we're going to see is the following. So we're going to have a look at the Chacham's question, and the answer the Torah gives, not quite the answer that we give, although the answer we give is related to that answer. But we're not going to go into that now, but we will just have a look at what the Pasuk says. So, 1 second. So I'm sure I want to get the complete thing. Here we are. Okay, yeah. So let's have a look at the Maimon. It's got the first part there. It says like this. Ki yish'olcha bincha mochar lemer. When your son will ask you tomorrow. Now, tomorrow in the Torah doesn't always mean tomorrow, it means in the future. Okay? And what's he going to ask you? Exactly what we say in the Haggadah. We say, Ben Chacham Mahu Oimer. What does the Chacham say? So it comes from a pasuk. The Chacham asks, look inside, it says, Moha Eidus v'hachukim v'hamishpatim. What are these mitzvahs basically? But we know the mitzvahs are divided into 3. So he says, Eidus, which are the testimonials, like eating matzah, putting on tefillin, these things. Chukim, the statutes, v'hamishpatim, and the logical laws. What are they? Asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu, that Hashem, our God, has commanded eschem you. Right? Okay. Now, what we answer him, which is going to bring later the man, I'll just tell you, what we answer him is as follows. We answer him a whole answer according to the Chumash. We say to him, Avadim Ayinu, we were slaves to Parim Mitzrayim. Hashem took us out with a strong hand. Hashem did miracles for us. Amazing, awesome miracles, and then he took us out. Took us out to bring us to the land of this land that Hashem has promised us, right? And it says that he commanded us. This is this very important pasuk. By Tzavenu Hashem, he commanded us to do all of these chukim, to fear Hashem, l'toiv lanu, for our benefit. That's what we say. All the days to keep us alive until this day. That's what we answer. Okay.
Just the chukim.
Yeah, that's one of the questions. Why don't he say chukim? Okay, we'll see. So, it says in the second line, it says, Shaila Zu, this question, he Shaila Saben Chacham, is the Shaila of the wise man, of the wise son. Like it says in the Haggadah, Chacham Ahu Omer, Chacham, what does he say? Maha'edus v'goy, but we quote the pasuk. So that's the question then Chacham. Now, he asks a bunch of questions. We'll go through the questions. We know the question that's asked in the Mamorim throughout the Rebbes. If we call the guy a Chacham, now, Chacham in the Torah is not just a person who's clever, who's got a good IQ. Chacham means he's got true wisdom. What's true wisdom? The true wisdom is Chachmas HaTorah, is the wisdom of the Torah, right? Obviously he knows about the mitzvahs. So Mashe Losse, so the first question is, what's his question? What are these Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpatim? I mean, he doesn't know. He's called a Chacham, he doesn't know what they are. He doesn't know about them. Right? Not talking about a Jew that came out of Mitzrayim, who was ignorant. We're talking about a Jew, the next generation, after they got the Torah, and he's a Chacham. Surely he knows the mitzvahs, right? Another thing, the Yeshlo the Mehemshach HaKosiv, you look in the continuing psukim, what we tell him when we say, Ba'avarta levincha, that we say to our son about the mitzvahs, and then we say, like I quoted before, Vayatzavenu Hashem lasis kol achukim ha'ele, Hashem commanded us to do all these mitzvahs, all these chukim, l'toiv lanu, for our benefits, shemevarim, shebekiyum ha'mitzvahs, shemevarim behamayla shebekiyum ha'mitzvahs. We explain the advantage of keeping mitzvahs, l'toiv lanu, it's for our benefit. Move on. Understood. So from there we can understand Shapirush Maha Edus, that when the Chacham asks what are these mitzvahs, he means Mahu Inyan mitzvahs as a Maili. He's saying what's the, not just asking what are the mitzvahs, he's asking what's the benefit of mitzvahs, what the greatness of the mitzvahs are. But Tzarech B'ir, that needs to be understood. Eich Shayach, how's it possible? Sheben Chacham Yishul Shayla Kazu, that the Ben Chacham, the wise son, should ask such a question? He doesn't know the benefit of mitzvahs. What is it all? Okay. Second of all, Oba Yoser in a movement, even not more understood, even a bigger question, the Habir be'inyan mitzvahs, when we explain the mitzvahs in our answer, b'tshuva d'amar televincha, oimer shnei inyanim, the Apostle says two things. Number one, vayitzoyeinu Hashem mitzrayim b'goymer, vayitzaveinu laskol achokim, he took us out of Mitzrayim and he commanded us to do the mitzvahs, which means, what we're really saying is, the kivun shoysi onu Mitzrayim, because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, onu mishubodim eilo l'kayim mitzvahs, so we are subservient to him to do the mitzvahs, we owe it to him. He took us out of Mitzrayim, so we need to do the mitzvahs. That's one thing we say. And second of all, v'oid inyan l'kim mitzvahs, we add, not only do we owe Hashem to do the mitzvahs, we also add Shem l'toiv lonu kol hayomim, that they are beneficial to us all the days. So says the Rebbe, because in the answer, we answer two things. Move on, it seems to be understood that both these things are something that the son didn't know. It's a chidush, right? He didn't know it. Otherwise, why are we answering him? Obviously, he didn't know it, right? Ain't a move on. This is not understood. Since he doesn't know anything about the mitzvahs, not only doesn't he know that the mitzvahs are beneficial to us. He doesn't even understand or appreciate this obligation to do mitzvahs just out of obedience, because we owe it to Hashem. He obviously doesn't know both those things. How can we call him a chacham? In other words, not only is he asking what the mitzvahs are, or what the greatness of the mitzvahs are, he's asking why we should keep mitzvahs altogether. He knows there are mitzvahs because he's asking what are these. He knows that there's eidus, there's chukim, mishpatim, right? But he doesn't even. But from the answer we give him, obviously we're telling him things he doesn't know.
Is it relevant that he says to you?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. Yeah, because the Rosh also does that, and we knock him over the head for that, right? Chacham we don't. We'll see in a second why. But it's not so simple. We'll see, right? But here's a big problem. In the answer we see, answer means he's telling him things he doesn't know. If he doesn't know that you have to keep mitzvahs because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. Like, so what does he know? Like, what, doesn't know anything. You call him a chacham? Now comes your question. Also, you have to understand. Why does he say to you? Eschem v'loy osonu. Doesn't say us, he says you. Now, remember the Rasha, we say he's excluding himself, and we tell him if you would have been there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. We're not so happy for the Rasha, right? Because he should have said oisonu, like, because he says, the Rasha says, Moa avoida zois lachem. What's this service, what's this ritual that you have? Not that we have, but you have, right? I'll tell you in a second. The Chacham does save himself a little bit, because he says, what's all these mitzvahs that Hashem gave you? That Hashem commanded you, but he says, Hashem, our God, commanded you. So he's saving himself a little bit, right? Makam Luta, so you can't really make a mistake to think Shemoisi Chas v'Sholem es atzma mehaklal, that he's taking himself out of the community. But nevertheless, we need to understand Masha Omer Eschem. Why does he say Eschem and not Oisana? The Havaleila Meimar, you should have said Asher Tziva Hashem Elkeinu Oisanu. Simple. Why don't you say what are these mitzvahs that Hashem commanded us? Oya Asher Tziva Hashem Elkeinu, or that Hashem our God commanded. Doesn't have to say anything. But too late. I heard once a cute little idea. Just a nice story from the Chafetz Chaim. In the Chafetz Chaim, and before the Chafetz Chaim, and during the Chafetz Chaim's time, this is a number of generations, in Europe there was the Haskalah movement, the Enlightenment movement, right? Similar to Reform a little bit. So they were people who parade, but they masqueraded as, some of them were actually real Torah scholars, but they didn't really believe in the holiness of Torah. And they used to go around and they chapped a lot of the youth. It was a big problem. I call the wokeness of today the modern day scholar. But anyway, that was the thing. So one time, so you just need to know this for context, because they were very into, they used to learn Tanakh a lot, and used to learn, but they were very into like the linguistics of the Torah and the language but they weren't into the Kedusha of the Torah, and they didn't believe so much, right? By the way, that's one of the reasons that in boys' yeshivas particularly, they don't learn Tanakh. You know, an average Torah scholar, yeshiva bacha, is very ignorant Tanakh. Do you know that? Because we don't learn Tanakh. Why don't we learn Tanakh? Because it became a thing. Tanakh is very important to learn. It's also very dangerous to learn. Because it's a lot of stories and commentary, and right? And particularly like the books of the prophets, Yeshayahu Navi, Yirmiyahu Navi, it's a lot of language. You need to really understand the language, but you can get caught up in the language and you can misuse the Tanakh. You need to really learn it properly from Hashem. So the Haskalah, the Maskilim, and like they learned a lot of Tanakh, but then it became like analyzing a literary text, nothing to do with the Torah. And that's why also was Tanakh. Another thing that Yeshiva Bacham did learn was Dikduk, like grammar. Most Yeshiva Bacham are very bad at Dikduk, because it was not taught, because they were scared. They were scared that it would cause people to go to the Haskalah. Nowadays it's different, but it's part of Torah, but nevertheless, the average Yeshiva wasn't so chapped in the language, Dikduk, and that. So one time there was one of these maskilim who came to the Chafetz Chaim, and he tried to masquerade as like a Torah scholar, and he was talking and learning with him. And the Chafetz Chaim smelt it right away. He knew exactly who he was. And he's listening to him, he was polite. So the guy asked the Chafetz Chaim, he says, I've got a question on the Haggadah, how come the Rosh, and he says, Eschem, we all upset with him, and then as we call him a Rosh, and he wouldn't be part of the community and all that. When it comes to the Chacham, he also says Eschem. It doesn't say Osana, he says Eschem. So the Chafetz Chaim says, listen, I want to tell you, I'll explain to you the pshat, because this was his moment. He says, it's very simple, he says, the Chacham is a yeshiva bach, he learns in yeshiva, he doesn't know Digduk, Eschem, Osana, but he says, but you, Russia, you know Digduk, and you say Eschem. Anyway, he chapped that, he's been caught, so he disappeared. That's the thing. Okay, but that's not obviously the simple pshat. Okay. So, have a look at the next part, the paragraph on top of the page here. And he says like this. So he's going to bring an explanation, which is a standard explanation in Chassidus about this. But then the rest of the Maim is going to take it to a whole new level. And he says like this. The point of the explanation is as follows. He brings from previous Mamorim. Al Pia Yodua. According to what is known, the Kiyum HaMitzvahs Shala Avos, the fulfillment of mitzvahs of our forefathers, Avraham Avinu kept mitzvahs, Yitzchak kept mitzvahs, right? They all kept mitzvahs. But we know that they were be'ikr mainly an avodah ruchnis. It was a spiritual experience. Now, let's explain that. What do you mean spiritual experience? They actually did mitzvahs. I mean, we know that from the story of Vayera. Avraham Avinu ate matzahs, right? Because it was Pesach. Yaakov, Yitzchak Avinu brought karbanos, whatever. I mean, there was mitzvahs that they did that were physical, right? We know there's a Kabbalah that Yaakov Avinu, when he did the whole thing with the sticks, and he changed the colors of the sticks, and the Lavan with the sheep, and the whole story, what he was doing is really, he was like putting on tefillin. It was like the same spiritual experience as tefillin, right? So the Avos wasn't just a spiritual, esoteric experience. They did mitzvahs in action, but we say like this. Of course, they lived in this world, and therefore to call anything a mitzvah, it's got to be connected with some sort of physical action. That is true. But with the Avos, it was a very different thing. The action was very insignificant. Right? That's what he means. He says because the physical action, the physical behavior, the physical action was just like a vessel for the spiritual experience to catch on. You follow? So in other words, like this, when we do a mitzvah also, a little bit like that. Any action we do, there's the oil and there's the keli, there's the light and there's the vessel. The light is the experience, the intention, everything spiritual about it. The keli is the vessel, right? So when Avraham Avinu ate matzah, it wasn't that the action was so important. He wanted to experience Pesach on a completely spiritual level. He wanted to experience any mitzvah on a completely spiritual level. But it needed to be expressed somehow, so it was expressed in the physical action. But the importance was the spiritual experience. Yeah? However, there are mitzvahs shenitnu b'matan Torah. The mitzvah that were given in Matan Torah, ikram v'asiyah b'poel. There, actually, the main focus is the action, not the intention, not the spiritual experience. It's important, the spiritual experience, but that's not what it's about. The asiyah is some mitzvah, doing the mitzvah, hu lo yachoneh, u kli lekavanosa. Doing the mitzvah is not sort of some preparation or some sort of vehicle to express the spiritual experience. It's the other way around. Ela adrabah, hu asiyah hi ikar. Doing it is the main thing. The power of action. Kamoy benidin digdan, right? Like we know with Pesach. Mitzvah achilas matzah. The kasher, like eating matzah. It's a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach night, right? The kasher yechavim b'soid mitzvahs matzah. A person will sit down on Pesach night and he'll meditate and he'll reflect and he'll have kavanah, he'll have intention. And he'll learn the deepest ideas about eating matzah, but yeah, v'chas v'sholem yechzer apel mamish. But chas v'sholem, the main thing will be missing, the actual eating of the mashmur, piece of shmur matzah. He will not generate into the world anything. Nothing will take place. It will have no effect whatsoever. Zero. Right? On the other hand, if you do the mitzvah actually, you do it. Even without any intention. I mean, it's a mitzvah, that's your basic intention, but nothing, he doesn't know anything about mitzvah, right? Before Pesach, we give our people's matzah, tell them once a guy, a delivery guy, he knew nothing, he didn't grow up Jewish, but he was Jewish. And he wasn't going to have a seder, but it was not, I wasn't even in the context that he invited him to a seder even. So I gave him a piece of matzah. I said, just tonight, sit down, and whatever part of the night, just eat a big piece of this thing I'm giving you. I said, it's a big mitzvah, right? That person, when he did that, Purim, right? Purim, I went to Elizabeth, a lot of places. What I do Purim is try and get as many people to do the mitzvahs. Some people don't even know what they think you're nuts. You take the shalach munach, let's exchange it. Okay, now you've done a mitzvah. Doesn't know about Purim, he never learned about Purim. He's not understanding what it's all about. He has no kavanah. And yet, that will bring yamshich ha'or. That will bring the light of Hashem into the world. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do kavanah. Of course, we have to do kavanah. But in Avraham Avinu's time, if he would have just ate matzah and not had any kavanah, he would do nothing. Do absolutely nothing. Part of the reason that is because actually before Matan Torah, we know, mitzvahs couldn't actually have an effect in the world. Actions couldn't have an effect. Because the action is physical, and the physical and the spiritual were somewhat apart. They were separated. That was the whole idea, right? It's a famous question that Chassidus asked, what's the whole big deal about Matan Torah? The Yidden were learning Torah before, they were learning Torah Mitzrayim, they had yeshivas. Avraham Avinu went to yeshiva. Shem Va'ever, the son and the grandson of Noach, ran a yeshiva. Yitzchak learned there, Yaakov learned there. Right? There was a lot of Torah learning before Matan Torah. So what's Matan Torah? So the basic answer that Chassidus gives is before Matan Torah, you could not bring the Oyer Hashem, the light of Hashem, into the physical realm. So for example, we say that Yaakov put on tefillin by moving around those sticks. He was doing the same thing that tefillin does. But the sticks didn't become holy. The sticks were nothing afterwards. The matzah wasn't holy. Right? I think about the Baditshva Rav. He was so excited about mitzvahs that before he ate the matzah, he would kiss the matzah. Matzah, this is holy matzah. But Avraham Avinu's matzah wasn't holy. It was just an action to express his spiritual experience of matzah.
So before Matan Torah, sins counted, but mitzvahs didn't.
Sorry?
Sins counted, but mitzvahs didn't.
What kind of sins? No, because they were specifically commanded. There was one mitzvah that was around. They were physically commanded not to eat from the fruit.
Right.
Yeah, because they were counted because they rebelled against Hashem. And therefore they removed the purity of the world. There is a mitzvah that brought purity of the world, like after Matan Torah. We said, no, and also the 7 Noach laws don't bring. It's different. The 7 Noach laws are commandments. It's modes of behavior. If non-Jews don't keep them, they're going against Hashem. It's not the role of a non-Jew to bring the spiritual into the physical, to make the physical holy. That's why they're all negative commandments, you realize, right? So what you shouldn't do. Oh, except for a munah, they have to believe in Hashem. Okay. But that's not a physical action, right? Avraham Avinu, if he would eat a piece of matzah and not have the intention, nothing would happen. The matzah is nothing, it's not holy. It's an action that's supposed to represent a spiritual experience, which he didn't have. Right? Now, when they had the spiritual experience, they elevated themselves, but only to a point. They elevated themselves as far as they could go, as far as their spiritual origin would allow them to do. But they couldn't bring down the essence of Hashem into the world. And now suddenly after Matan Torah, you can pick up a piece of matzah with not much intention, eat it, and you bring in the light of Hashem into the world, and the matzah is holy, and you're elevated, and it's an amazing thing. The only example of that before Matan Torah was bris milah. It was the only, when Avraham Avinu circumcised himself, that part of his body became holy. Why? Because he was specifically given a mitzvah from Hashem. Okay, but that's the only thing. Otherwise, it was all about spiritual experiences and spiritual elevation. Yeah? This is the Chacham's question. Don't forget, this was an amazing transition. How do you bring down the light of Hashem through a physical action? What's physicality? Physicality is nothing. Suddenly you tell me that if you sit on Pesach night and you have a spiritual experience of matzah, you do nothing. But if you're a simple Jew and you eat a big piece of shmur matzah that tastes like cardboard, suddenly you brought an amazing explosion to the world? Now that's a question for a Ben Chacham. That we understand. That's a good question, right? That's what he says. Moha'idus, what's all the mitzvahs? Asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu eschem. That Hashem has commanded you, meaning you, eschem dafke, you, the generation after Matan Torah. That's what he means. He means, what's going on here? What did Hashem give you at Matan Torah? You. Meaning you as opposed to, not opposed to me, as opposed to Avraham Avinu. Right? In Devarim. But it doesn't matter. Devarim is a repetition of the Torah. I mean, yeah.
So there's no sense of chronologically where it came?
No, it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah. He says, why is he saying to you? He's saying, you're a new generation. You meaning I'm the one who didn't go out of Mitzrayim, you're the one who did go out of Mitzrayim. Suddenly you have a different thing. What's this? What happened to you guys? Right? What's this mitzvah that Hashem gave you that suddenly with an action you can bring everything? The kivin shavayda shalachem, Matan Torah says, since the avodah, the service of you, he yasiya is doing v'loy avodah ruchnis kavodas avos, and not a spiritual experience like the avos, like Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov served Karachaleya. Eich nimshar giler and sevel avodah. Could you please tell me how do you make a revelation of Hashem through this type of service? It was a foreign concept. Today we're more used to it, right? But yeah. So he says, what's the answer? Says the pasuk, when Martin Levin, you should tell your son. Let me explain to you. We were slaves to Pharaoh Mitzrayim. Why you say, no Hashem Mitzrayim, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. Why and he told us to do all these mitzvahs. What does that mean? What does that mean by the answer? The Golus Mitzrayim, Yitzis Mitzrayim, the coming out of Mitzrayim, you should understand, changed everything. Why did it change everything? Because coming out of Mitzrayim actually was not an end to itself. Matan Torah was a preparation for Matan Torah. We know that when Moshe Rabbeinu stood at the burning bush, right? Hashem said to him, "You're going to go be the leader, take the Jews out of Mitzrayim." And the famous line, when you take this nation out, you will serve me on this mountain. In other words, understand that the Geula, the redemption of Mitzrayim, is for Matan Torah. Pesach and Shavuos is one journey. I have a childhood memory. Things stuck in your mind. So when I was growing up, there was this demonstrations and there was the whole effort to help the Jews behind the Iron Curtain, as we call it there, right? And the communists were already here. And there was the slogan, "Let my people go." Remember that slogan?
Mm-hmm.
They used to use it at big demonstrations. Incidentally, the Rebbe was very against demonstrations. But anyway, that was a separate story. He was very involved in the Russian Jewry, and he believed that it harmed them, not helped them. Anyway, that's a separate discussion. But that was the slogan, "Let my people go." But I remember there was Simchas Torah. I remember who it was actually. It was funny. It was the mentor of mine, Rabbi Shalom Berg-Rona, who lived in South Africa. And there was Simchas Torah, and he had a Fila Chaims, and he was bringing. And there was some flags, some flags. There were some flags of Sukkot that had the slogan, "Let my people go," which comes from the pasuk "Shalach et Ami," right? Shalach et Ami. Mm-hmm. And he was bringing that it's the missing a word. So they're missing the main word. If you look at the pasuk, it says, "Shalach et Ami," let my people go. V'ya'avduni, and they will serve me. The point of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to get to Matan Torah. So I remember that etched in my mind. He was saying the point of Shalach et Ami is not just let my people go. Yes, let my people go, but they should be able to serve me. That's the purpose, right? So the purpose of Vayotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Tekaseat is Matan Torah. What happened in Matan Torah? Matan Torah, there was a divine explosion. An unbelievable thing happened. The Matan Torah, Nitan HaKoyach, the Matan Torah, the power was given. Shal Yidei Mitzvahs Maises, through physical actions. Lasas kol achukim, as we say in the pasuk, we answer the chacham, we say lasois. That's the expression that's used in the pasuk. To do these mitzvahs, right? That lasois stuff, with the emphasis on doing, yamshichu hamshachos, will be able to bring down into this world the mailo yoiser, more higher, more than the avos brought into the world with their spiritual experience. We can bring in a higher liberation through action. To the point that we can bring down the essence of Hashem. Well, explain just a little bit. What happened to Matan Torah? It says, before Matan Torah, there was a complete division between the physical and the spiritual, between the material and the godly, right? Heaven and earth. It says in Matan Torah, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem came down to Har Sinai. What's the pshat? Because ultimately that's the purpose of creation, of course, to bring Hashem into the physical world, right? But it says Hashem came down to Har Sinai, which means Hashem came down to the physical world, right? Meaning there was a merge between the physical and the spiritual. How can there be? What does that mean? If physical and spiritual are so diametrically opposed that they just don't meet with each other, as was the case for the first 2,000 years of creation, in a very big way, meaning there was a merge in a way where you could live in this world and you could do spiritual things, but it wouldn't have effect on the first physical, like with the mitzvahs of the others, right? Yeah, I mean Hashem, Avraham Avinu, he spread monotheism and he made people better and he spoke about Hashem. So the knowledge of Hashem was there, but this idea of connecting the physical and spiritual is impossible because Ruchnis and Gashmis are two different things. They don't merge. I mean, we know that they do today, but they don't. How did they merge?
Oh, sorry, Rebbe, how did you know that it didn't make? Did you?
Torah tells us. That's what Chassidus explains to us here.
Okay.
The sticks can be thrown away afterwards. Right? They didn't. They weren't elevated. It's when Hashem came to Har Sinai, and He said, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha." Right? I am Hashem your God. So we know the three words there: Anochi, Hashem, and Elokecha. Right? I am Hashem, Yudke Vavke, Elokecha, your God, which is Elokim. Right? So we know the Hashem and Elokim thing. Right? We know that Hashem, Yudke Vavke, is the infinite name of Hashem, representing the infinite revelation of Hashem, the infinity of Hashem's godliness, and so on. Right? Hashem's light. Elokeinu is Tzimtzum, the concealment of the infinity of Hashem, which gives rise to the physical worlds. What's Anochi? Anochi means I don't have a name. I'm above those names. I, as Chassidus says, Anochi, Misha Anochi. I, who am I? I'm just I. Because we always talk about Hashem, Yudke Vavke being the highest expression of Hashem, but it is, it's not. Because it's a name. Once you have a name, it's a description, which means it's limited to a certain degree. The limitation of a Yudke Vavke is that it's limited to infinity. It's limited to spirituality, limited to godliness. Elokim is limited to Tzimtzum. The combination of both comes from the Anochi, from the essence of Hashem, that transcends both. Hashem is not spiritual, he's not physical, he's not infinite, he's not finite. He can be whatever he wants, he can be nothing, he can be either, he can be both. When the essence of Hashem is revealed, that's when Gashmis and Ruchnis come together, because they're both an expression of the same God. And that's where this power to reveal Hashem in the Gashmi suddenly appeared.
But hold on, before the sin of the tree, spirituality and physicality coexisted.
It didn't necessarily, no, it's not so simple. Yes, the world was a place where it was susceptible to godliness, but it wasn't that the godliness became, it wasn't that the physical object was godly. Physical was the table was a table. It's different. Especially after the sin, but even before the sin. It was a physical world. Whatever that physical world meant, it could be a very good physical world. It could be a physical world that showed Hashem's tzimtzum, and consciousness of God, but it wasn't a world that could be changed, its physicality. It couldn't be what it isn't. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And the nefesh elokis, when did that?
Yeah, that was a godly soul, but again, it had a problem. The godly soul was there before, and especially by Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu had a soul, but it wasn't able to change the body. It changed it to a point, elevate it to a point, to become more refined. Of course, Avraham Avinu became at a high level, but it was a high spiritual level. But it wasn't that the physical was completely transformed to something holy. Yeah, of course, the obvious were chariot Hashem and other, we learn in Tanya. But that idea of changing, of bringing the ruch, of making the merge, that it becomes one thing, that didn't happen before in the Torah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, they're all amazing explosions. Let's not undermine this. The spirituality that the Avos generated was unbelievable. Something we'll never ever reach. Much higher than us. But our mitzvahs bring a higher level. We can do something they couldn't do. Oh, sure. My jacket is in there, I think. It's just one of the pockets of the jacket.
Okay, so they were very spiritually...
They were infinitely greater than us. And in fact, Chassidus says that the mitzvahs they did was paved the way for the mitzvahs that we do. We only can serve Hashem because they served Hashem. Because they infused us with such a munah and such kedusha and such ruchnis and all like that. But the fact is that what we do and put on tefillin, when we do light a Shabbos candle, is something, we accomplish something that the others couldn't do. Now we know what's perplexing to the Ben Chacham. Right? He's Taka Chacham, he's asking a good question. Yeah?
They had a completely different relationship with the
Yeah,
world
yeah,
around
yeah.
them to us.
Yeah. I don't know if this is accurate, but I'll give you an example to bring it out, right? Well, why how Matan Torah changed everything. Okay, that has more to do with Bechira, Hashem chose us, but it is. You know, Avraham Avinu says he converted hundreds of people, and Sarah also, right? They made the biggest Chabad ever. What happened to all those people? Nothing. They weren't fundamentally changed. Today a person becomes a Yid, his children are Jewish, finished. Like it's because it's intrinsic. His whole being has changed. Okay, that also has to do with the fact that Hashem, the choosing of a Yid came, but it all goes together. That's part of Matan Torah. That like Hashem chose the body. It says in Tanya, Ubono v'charta, Hashem chose the Jew at Matan Torah. It says the Alter Rebbe actually means the body of a Yid, not just the neshama. I mean, that's another whole other sculpture. Follow? Okay. So that's the basic answer. Okay, that could be good. That could be that's a word for the Seder table. We can give that a question. We can understand the answers. Now we understand. Let's get so again. So the Chacham comes to his father and he says, "I don't understand. Eschem, you guys, the whole world changed. What's going on? All of a sudden, physical mitzvah. What's this? What's all these mitzvahs? What's all these mitzvahs that you did that suddenly action can change everything? When we know until now action was just a way of expressing the mitzvah, but the main thing was the spiritual experience. How can I do it?" So his father answers him, yes, according to the pasuk at least. The father answers him, "Now Hashem took Salam Mitzrayim. That was all because of Matan Torah, and Matan Torah, yes, changed everything and explains to him how it happens." Fine. Okay, that's just the first chapter of the Maimon, and there's like a bunch of about 10 chapters. Okay, says the Rebbe. Let's go further. We'll get into the next part a little bit. So you have to understand, chapter base. You have to understand. This explanation by saying that the Chacham's question refers to the mitzvahs that were given after Matan Torah. That only explains after he says Hashem Elokeinu, he says Eschem, right? To emphasize that his question is not about the mitzvahs given to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but the mitzvahs that he gave you guys, my parents, la'achar Matan Torah, right? Okay. Avo, he says, not completely answer the question. Why? Because that would have been understood if he had to use a different language. He could have still said Asher Tziva Hashem Elokeinu Oisanu. He could have just said Hashem commanded us, and that would have been us means us and you distinct from the Ovos. In other words, the people who us collectively, that's number one. Second question he says is Gam Tzorach Mo Eidus HaChukim Mishpatim. Why does he break it down? What's the Eidus Chukim and Mishpatim? The Ma'acha Sheshalosoi who are Kolos HaMitzvahs. If you're just asking about the power of action, the power of mitzvahs, just say Maha Mitzvahs. What's all the mitzvahs? It's not relevant to the discussion. Eidus, Chukim, Mishpatim, different types of mitzvahs. It's not relevant. Why does he specify Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpatim? And he emphasizes the question. He said, actually, we talked about before the intention, the spirituality of a mitzvah, and the action of the mitzvah, right? Where does the division of the mitzvahs have more effect? Not on the action. The actions are the same, right? I mean, I'm one little thing inside. Let me just, the Rebbe says, ask such a brilliant question here. If his whole question is about the value of the action of a mitzvah, why did he have to talk about the different types of mitzvahs? And actually, it undermines his question. His question is, what's the power of action? What is this that you're going to bring God into the world, in the physical world, just by doing an action, right? Now, and he says, Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpat. So we have three types of mitzvahs, right? We have the mitzvah of Chukim, which we know mitzvahs have no reason. Sorry, let's not the other way around. We have mitzvahs of Mishpatim, that are logical mitzvahs have a reason, right? But they're a very rational reason, to the point that these are mitzvahs that we would, chas v'sholom, if the Torah wasn't given, we might come up with a similar idea, as we find in the world, not always exactly, they don't get it right, but they come up with similar concepts. Don't kill is a universal idea, right? Don't steal is a universal idea. I mean, maybe the details are different, but then we have Eidus, which also have a reason, but it's not a reason we come up ourselves. Once we are told the reason, it makes sense. Eat matzah because the Yidden had to, run away from Mitzrayim. They didn't have time to bake matzah, whatever. But that's a reason that's post the fact, right? Once Hashem gave the mitzvah, he explains it, and it makes sense. Then we have chukim have no reason. Now, when I do a mitzvah, what difference does it make if it makes sense, doesn't make sense, or like? It makes sense more to the spiritual part of the mitzvah, the way I do it, my attitude, my understanding, my rationale. It doesn't make a difference to the action. The action is done. If I eat a kazais of matzah, does it matter? Does it change the action if you did it because the Yidden left Mitzrayim, or you did it because I don't know why, or I did it because it's logical? It doesn't make a difference. So, why does the Chacham have to specify? And in fact, it's got nothing to do with his question. It's contradictory to his question. If he would be exploring the spirituality of the mitzvahs, then it makes sense to say, what's the chukim, eidus, mishpatim, whatever. But he's not. He's exploring the action of the mitzvah. So then why go into something that's not relevant to the action? It's only relevant to the understanding of the mitzvah, not to the action of the mitzvah.
It doesn't make a difference if that mitzvah that you're doing is, like say, eating matzah. It doesn't have anything to do with anyone else. But if you are doing a mitzvah to help somebody or something, you haven't got the right attitude.
No, sometimes the attitude can affect the mitzvah. You're correct. But let's say I do it. Well, not always. Let's say there's someone that needs help, and I actually can't stand the person, and I'm not interested in helping him. But I'm doing it because it's a mitzvah. So I fake it. Okay, so yeah, I'll smile like that. mitzvah's done. Maybe not 100%, but it's still done. Right? But yeah, it would be better if I have the right attitude, but the action is still done. And he's exploring action, so what's the difference of what kind of mitzvahs is?
So you're saying that's why should he ask the different
Why should he ask a different ones? It's not relevant to his question. It undermines the focus of his question. His question is to understand what's the power of action. The power of action is the same, whether it's chukim, eidus, or mishpatim. The level of intention is not the same, yes. But the power of action is the same, so you should stick to his question. What's he kriching in a different question? It's not an illegitimate question to understand the difference between eidus, chukim, and mishpatim. That's a good question. But nothing to do with this question. Okay. I'm going to skip out. I'm going to just tell you outside. There's another question he asks. Also, a very, very fascinating question. He says, "What's these eidus, chukim, and mishpatim?" It's completely out of order. There are two orders you can say the three types of mitzvahs. Either you go bottom up, meaning you say mishpatim, I'll do it because it's logical, or no, I'll do it, I understand it, it's not logical, I understand it, or I'll do it because Hashem says so. So that's mishpatim, eidus, and chukim, correct? Or you start the other way around, top down. Chukim, eidus, yeah, I have some understanding. Mishpatim, I fully understand. Putting eidus, chukim, mishpatim has no order to it. Like, what's the order there? And we know everything in the Torah is exact, obviously, right? So we're going to get a whole new understanding in eidus in this mimer. But, yeah? Okay. Okay, Gimel. Let's have a look at Gimel. We'll make a start on this and we'll come back to it next week. We're going to understand this by prefacing what the previous Rebbe said in a mimer with a similar beginning. That the Friedrich Rebbe said the first Pesach that he came to America to live, which was 1940, he came just before Purim, and the first Pesach he said this mimer. Just not trivial, but fun fact, that Pesach he spent in a place called Lakewood. In 770 came later, a few months later. Anyway, right. Diuk, that he also explores the nuances b'shaylas ben chacham ksiv eschem. He also addresses the fact that the chacham says eschem, right? And he asks the same question of that he seems to be sounding like the Rasha, right? Over there in that mimer he adds, he says that even though the chacham does say Hashem Elokeinu, that he does put himself part of the Yidden, and he surrenders to Hashem and everything. That's the main part. But when it comes to Eidus Chukim Mishpatim, he's saying Eschem. Bottom line, he's not saying Oisanu, he's saying Eschem. Right? So the Rebbe says that the way the previous Rebbe phrases it, Melosh Namayim Mashmar, שהדיוק בזה שאומר אסכם הוא לא רק שצורך ביור למה אומר אסכם, אלא גם בזה שאומר אסכם לא יסונו שעל די מוקליטה שאומר לקיים מחס בכלל. In other words, he's saying like this. It's worse than we thought before the question. He divides the Ben Chocham's question into two. One is like, what's generally the mitzvahs? Okay, he does say Elokeinu, he knows God's the boss. But the fact that he says Eschem, and that's specifically with regard to Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpatim, is kind of maybe, it seems like it's suggesting, which it isn't, but it seems like it's suggesting that part of that's got nothing to do with me, that's got to do with you. In other words, he is to a point taking himself out. He's saying generally, yeah, follow Hashem, but the importance of Eidus, Chukim, in other words, you could read them in Chacham's question, and maybe to a degree it is his question. Look, I get Hashem commanded us, I'm okay, he's boss, I'll do what he wants. But that you're telling me that there's a difference between Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpatim, I don't get that. Maybe that's something it's something that's relevant to you, maybe. It's not relevant to me. Right? Then maybe in other words, when it comes to the specifics, it is taking himself out of the klal, and that's a problem. So we need to understand that. It's going to be, it's going to be connected to it, but it's going to be much deeper. Okay. So let's start. We'll start the next paragraph. I'll probably come back to next week. Let's start. The bottom of the page there. in the second page. So we're gonna let's embark on an explanation. The mitzvah shnei inyanim. Every mitzvah has two parts to it. This is what we have to understand. Zeh she'ha mitzvah sem tzivui Hashem. One part is this mitzvah is the commandment of Hashem. That's it. That is equal in all mitzvahs. You can't differentiate one mitzvah from another. Every mitzvah is the commandment of Hashem equally. Second part of a mitzvah is there we have the differences that one's edus, one's chukim, one's mishpatim. Ushnei inyanim eile, that's what it introduces now. These two things, who the kiyum ha-mitzvahs, actually are relevant to the way you fulfill the mitzvah. The kavanas ha-mitzvahs, that when you have kavana in the mitzvah, which by the way, kavana is important. We just overemphasize the action before, because that's the chidush of Matan Torah. But of course, we have to make our actions as bright and as enthusiastic as they are, and that's dependent on the kavanah, right? But when we have, every mitzvah is supposed to have kavanah, right? In the kavanah of a mitzvah, shnei inyanim, there are two concepts. There's kavanah klolis, is what we call a general kavanah, which is that whenever you do a mitzvah, you're supposed to have a general kavanah. That is, I'm doing this mitzvah, L'kayem tzivui Hashem, to fulfill the mitzvah of Hashem. That's it. Doesn't matter which mitzvah it is. The kavanah zu. And by the way, if you sat down on the Seder night and you ate matzah, and you're not an empty person, you're just not very educated, and you say, "I'm doing this because my rabbi told me it's a mitzvah of Hashem." Finished. That's already a kavanah. That's a good kavanah, right? But and that's a kavanah which is in all the mitzvahs equally. Then there's kavanah protis. There's a specific kavanah. Kiyum ha-mitzvahs, that you do a mitzvah because, or why are you doing this mitzvah? Is it because shu eidus ois v'zikaron? Is it because it's a sign or remembrance, a symbolism, is in you for something? Or because it's a decree from Hashem, so it's chukim, or because it makes sense. Now, obviously we shouldn't do a mitzvah because it makes sense. We should do a mitzvah Hashem said so. That's why we have the first kavanah. But apparently we'll see that you're also supposed to have a kavanah to do with the specifics. So when you do a mishpatim, you have to have kavanah that it's reason. It's part of the process. A lot of time we explain not like that. A lot of time we say, right. A lot of time we say that really every mitzvah starts off as a chukim, and therefore, whenever you do a mitzvah, you shouldn't not steal because it's socially accepted not to steal. You should not steal because Hashem said don't steal. But what we'll see is that's true. We're not undermining that. That is true. But we'll see that because a mishpatim has a reason, the reason also must become part of the kavanah of the mitzvah. We'll see later how that works. But
that reason is a reason that's accessible to us. That is not necessarily the reason for the mitzvah.
correct. But it's the reason that Hashem gave us for the mitzvah. It's the reason how the mitzvah was expressed. It's been expressed in that reason.
Okay.
No. So when you have the second, I want to make sure that you understand this. When you make the second kavanah, is not to replace the first kavanah. I'm not doing it because of its reason.
No.
Never doing it because of its reason. But I'm building in the reason to the kavanah. And that's important. Which we'll see next week, right? And Hashem wants us to understand and apply that understanding. I've told you the story many times that my grandfather asked the Rebbe in Purim in 1952. And he was a big intellectual and then considered the intellectual of Chassidus, right? And he asked the Rebbe a bracha for a munuk. He says, I don't understand anything anyway, so I want a bracha at least to believe. And the Rebbe told him, I've never told you this, I'm sure. He walked over to the Rebbe and he asked, it was the first time he saw the Rebbe, he lived in Israel. Moshe Grari, his name was a famous Chassid, he was famous, they call a good masculine Chassidus, a person who understands Chassidus very deeply. So he was a big intellectual, so he asked the Rebbe, but he was a Chassid. So he went over to the Rebbe and he said, I want to ask a bracha for, it was Purim, and he said to the Rebbe, I want to ask a bracha for a munah. I just want to believe, because I don't understand anything anyways. That's why, after all his learning, he came to the conclusion he doesn't really understand anything. So the Rebbe told him this line, a very beautiful line. He said, Verstehen darf man. You have to understand, but you mustn't want to understand. Or you mustn't need to understand. You do a mitzvah, every mitzvah we do because Hashem said so. It doesn't matter if it's the most logical mitzvah. But we also have to understand it and bring the understanding into the kavanah. Right?
So there's no merit in treating everything as if it's a chok.
There's merit. but also then adding in the understanding. We'll see later that they all three, Mechukim, Eidos, Mishpatim, are all three important, critical parts of the kavanah of the mitzvah, of every mitzvah actually. Because there's also Chukim aspect of Mishpatim. Yes, we'll get to it.
You're going to recap next week.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Right, it says like this. This is the question of the Ben Chacham. He says the Shaila of Ben Chacham, the Shaila of the Chacham is, Ma ha'edus Chukim Mishpatim. Why? Why do I? In other words, I'm prepared to do all the mitzvahs, but the kivin shekol mitzvah mitzvah Hashem. This is exactly his question. Because all the mitzvahs are the commandment of Hashem, man don't get edus chukim mishpatim. So why do I need the differences? Why do I need edus chukim mishpatim? Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. So yes, part one of his question is, I don't understand the power of action anyway. Okay, you explained to me, but I have a second question. If you tell me it's so important to listen to Hashem and do the action, and in fact, you're about to explain to me why the action is even more important than the spiritual experience. So then why do I need Eidos Chukim Mishpatim? Why do I need this different kavanah? And that's why that's the real question. That even after he says Hashem Elokeinu, we still ask, why did you say Eschem? Because yes, he says Hashem Elokeinu, I know I'll do the mitzvahs, don't worry, I'm not a Rasha. But there is an Eschem here. He's saying, I don't understand. You were given the Eidos Chukim Mishpatim, but why? For me, I don't need it. I just will do it because Hashem said so.
Who's the you he's talking to?
His parents.
Not post nothing to their parents.
Yes, they are passed on to their parents.
But that's not the aspect that he's speaking of.
Yeah, but he says, I get you, but I don't understand why Hashem gave you, meaning, I don't see the need to do mitzvahs like that. But he gave it to you, so why?
Like a Russia and then he's
Well, he's not a Russia, but and also, it doesn't really mean that, but we could think he means it. That's what he's saying. Because that's his question. His question is really, the bottom line is his question is two questions. The first explanation we learned, that his question is, what's the action part? Well, what's going on here? What Avraham and his mitzvahs couldn't do it and we could, right? Through an action, okay? But he has another question. And then the Rebbe asked the question on that, okay, so why does he go into the whole Eidos Chukim Mishpatim thing? If that was his question, so why? So forget about it. He just ask about the power of action. So the Rebbe, no, because there's part two to the question. That's the main thing here. Part two to the question is, I get it. I'll do the action, but then why do I need to know? If it has a reason, another reason, I'll just do it. The first kavanah. Why do I need the second kavanah?
Which explains why it's important.
And he does it in such a way where he actually almost excludes himself. That's why we're asking. He should have said, Oisanu, not just Elokeinu. He should have said, us. I'm part of this, but I need to understand it, right? Okay.
Must be, please.
Okay.
Stop, please.
Very good.